Okay, so good morning. It is December 11th, 2020. This is African American Studies. I'm your instructor, Mr. Townsend. I'm going to pull up our PowerPoint for today, which is, here we go. Okay, that didn't work. That's the wrong one. Okay. I'm going to share my screen with you and we're going to get started. Okay, so welcome, good morning. I have a list of things that we're going to do today. I see the agenda. So this is our agenda for today. So it's just my class here for social sciences. It's a hybrid for Black history. So we're going to review Nat Turner and the slave revolt of 1831. We're going to look at Today in Black History and a veteran called Lewis Lattimore. We're going to examine our essential questions. I'm going to give you an introduction to the abolitionists and the abolitionist movement. We will define and elaborate on the 13th to 15th Amendments. And we'll be looking at John Brown. I got rid of Frederick Douglass because I thought it was too much. And there's a video on John Brown and early abolitionists, and then we'll have our assessment, and I will assign you checkpoint 2. Okay, so that's our agenda for today. So our essential question is, how does social change happen? How have individuals and groups fought for social change historically, and how do these social movements continue today? So our social change that we're focusing on now, we had done I don't know if we had to backtrack a little bit, but in the class before we had, I don't know if we went over slavery. Let's see, I don't think it's in this one. Let's see if I can find the other one. Give me a second. 12:8. Oh, that's not right. Okay, I think it's this one. Oh, come on. I just have way too many buttons open. Okay, so to review Nat Turner and the slave revolt, in 1831, Nat Turner, who was a slave who returned he returned voluntarily back into slavery, but he did it with the intent of overthrowing his masters. He had no intent of going back to slavery. So Nat Turner, he was an abolitionist, and he actually started a slave revolt in which he killed 60 people, and he did it in the name of holy retribution, which means he was against the treatments of Blacks in America, and he felt like slavery had reached a boiling point. That was
Ambria, sweetheart, you're not muted. There you go.
Okay.
What did you say?
I said you're not muted, so we could hear everything. And also, I'm about to send you your schedule, okay? Because you're supposed to be in physical science.
Oh wow, okay.
So just check your email. Sorry.
But I do have her on my roster for today.
It looks like she's in social science yesterday, 3rd period.
Yesterday, 3rd period?
Yeah.
Let me just grab my other social sciences folder here. Yeah, that is a Thursday class. So she needs to be, so Miss Kelsey's going to give you your schedule. I think you are in the wrong class here. I was looking at the wrong folder. So this should be my Tuesday and Friday class. Sorry about that, Ambria. I was looking at the wrong sheet. Okay, so
So I'm about to leave, right?
yes, Miss Kelsey.
Yes, and Ambria, if you check your email, I just sent you an email with your roster and the link to go to the other class, okay?
All right, thank you.
Okay, so our central question is, how does social change happen? How have individuals and groups fought for social change historically, and how do these social movements continue today? So the social change that we were studying the last class, we'll go into this class a little bit, is a change in American society after the revolt of Nat Turner and the Civil War. We will be examining John Brown and some other prominent abolitionists that were before and post Civil War. There's an article there about Black history, about the abolitionist movement, if you're interested in reading that article. And to abolish the practice of slavery, to abolish something means to remove it, is to get rid of it. So let me add some definition to that. To abolish means to do away with. So what were abolitionists? Let's go to abolitionists. We're going to jump around a little bit. Okay. So abolitionists were people who, by definition, a person who favors the abolition of a practice of institution, especially capital punishment, or at this time, slavery. Okay. Some of the big abolitionist names were Sojourner Truth, Harriet Beecher Stowe, Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, William Lloyd Garrison, Lucretia Mott, and David Walker. The gentleman on the right there, that is Frederick Douglass, who was one of the well-known abolitionists and one of my personal heroes. So after the Civil War, or right before the Civil War, we had the 13th through 15th Amendments that were added to our Constitution. The 13th Amendment abolished, which means to do away with, removed removed slavery and involuntary servitude, except in the case of committing a crime. And the question I asked the other class, are prisoners today an example of long-term effects of the 13th Amendment? If you're interested in it, on Netflix, there is a documentary called The 13th, and that will help you get a better understanding of the long-term implications of whether or not slavery was abolished or slavery was transitioned into a different medium. So instead of working on plantations, we have people working in fields. But let's look at the 13th Amendment. 13th Amendment has two sections. The first one says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime where the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any other place subject to their jurisdiction. So the 13th Amendment gave freedom to anybody that was enslaved except for prisoners. And the Section 2 just means, Section 2 is just that Congress should have the power to enforce these laws. So this is the 14th and 15th Amendment. The 14th and 15th Amendment provided two things. The 14th Amendment provided equal, this is the actual amendment itself. It says, no state shall make or enforce any laws which shall abridge the privileges or immunity of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, and property without due process of law. So this means that Black people were given equal protection under the law. And the 15th Amendment gave Black men, only Black men, the right to vote. So these hyperlinks on the top and bottom, these are just supplemental information for you to find out about the 15th Amendment and the 14th Amendment, and some modern news that has to do with the 14th and 15th Amendment. So with the growth of the 14th and 15th Amendment and these abolitionists, naturally there would be a backlash against slavery. So abolitionists are a person who favors the abolition of a practice, or to abolish a practice or institution, especially common capital punishment, or at their time, slavery. So I'm going to show you a short video on some of the importance of the abolitionist movement. One second, I gotta get this up. Okay, so we're gonna watch this short video. This young lady is explaining what was the importance of the abolitionist movement.
It's so important for students to understand the abolitionist movement because the efforts, the strategies, and the ideologies that the abolitionists practice have set a really good model for how we understand social activism today. That if you were to fast forward 100 years to the civil rights movement, of the same tactics and strategies were used during the abolitionist movement. It's a massive movement to abolish a massive system, and that there were people who were risking their lives and their well-being to make sure that slavery was overthrown, nonviolently if possible. And I think they are probably, to me, one of the most significant group of reformers that I've ever studied. Some of the things that the abolitionists do that I think we still do today is they understood the power of the press, and they used newspapers to get out and disseminate a lot of their ideas about why slavery was wrong. And they do that in some pretty remarkable ways. I think that when you think about David Walker, and he writes his famous appeal, and he makes sure that it goes all over the United States. And in that appeal, he's talking about why slavery is wrong. He's talking about why slavery is violent. He's talking about how it needs to be overthrown. Equally important, he's talking about how Black people are equal, right? And that they need to be acknowledged for their equal humanity. I think the work that abolitionists are doing is twofold. One, they are stressing the importance of not just emancipation, but immediate emancipation. We don't want it in 100 years. We don't want it next year. We want freedom now. That's really important. And then for Black abolitionists, they're really stressing emancipation, yes, because that's a good start, but also equality, that equality and emancipation have to go hand in hand. And the things that they do to really push those efforts, I think, are so remarkable. I tell my students about the Underground Railroad. I talk about how they help escaped slaves get to freedom or get to Canada. They have relief societies put in place so that when fugitive slaves get to the North, they have shelter, they have jobs, they have clothing, they have food. And they're constantly pushing a political agenda, making sure that politicians are hearing them so that legally things can change so that slavery can be overthrown. It's not just a social movement, it's an economic movement, it's a political movement, it's a moral movement.
Okay, so that was the significance of the Abolitionist Party. And a lot of the techniques that the Abolitionist Party used are still being used today. So let me come back to the PowerPoint here. So by definition, what is an abolitionist? Someone define the word abolitionist. Or what did they want? What did abolitionists want? You can either put it in chat or you could just answer out loud. What did abolitionists want? What was their goal? What did they want to end? Good. Equality for blacks and end slavery. Thank you, Destiny. I appreciate that. So they wanted equality for blacks, but they more were focused on abolishing slavery as an act. They saw it as a cruel and inhumane thing, and they wanted to get rid of it completely. Even though the 13th Amendment gave black people their freedom in America, we know from studying classes before that things such as the Black Codes and Jim Crow laws they were put in place to keep blacks from having social mobility, from voting, from eating at the same place as other people. All those things came after the Civil War. So the information that we're studying right now is when, after 1831 and Nat Turner's revolt, slavery was still in full effect in the United States. The United States Civil War did not begin until 1860 or 1861. So at that time, slavery was still rampant in this country. So I want to introduce you to a person named John Brown, okay? So John Brown was a leading figure in the abolitionist movement. And remember, abolitionist is someone who wants the end of slavery in pre-Civil War United States. Unlike many anti-slavery activists, he was not a pacifist, which means he believed in violence. He was not a nonviolent person. And he believed in aggressive action against slaveholders and any government officials who enabled them. An entrepreneur who ran tannery and cattle trading business prior to the economic crisis of 1839, Brown became involved in the abolitionist movement following the brutal murder of Presbyterian minister and anti-slavery activist Elijah P. Lovejoy in 1837. He said at the time, "Here before God, in the presence of these witnesses, from this time I consecrate my life to the destruction of slavery." That's a little background on John Brown. So this is John Brown himself, okay? And we have to understand that not all abolitionists, is it Ayana? Am I saying your name right?
Yes, you said it right.
Welcome to class, Ayana. We are discussing the 1850s and a group of people called the abolitionists, people who were against slavery, okay?
Okay.
So this gentleman right here, his name was John Brown. He's got the sweet beard, definitely got a long beard going on there. He was hung December 2nd, 1859. And John Brown was raised in a family that had strong anti-slavery views. He fathered 20 children. That was something I did not know about him. So I don't know how many wives he had, but to father 20 children seems like a lot. He was conductor on the Underground Railroad, one of the most famous conductors on the Underground Railroad. Do you guys remember from earlier history classes, what was the name of the woman who ran the Underground Railroad? Remember, the Underground Railroad was a series of trails, hidden passageways through houses for slaves to get free from the North. They called her Moses. Do you remember her name?
Harriet Tubman.
Thank you, Destiny. Harriet Tubman. So John Brown worked in league with Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass. The difference was John Brown did not believe more in diplomacy than action. So in 1856, he killed 6 men. Most of them were slave masters. Just flat out killed them for the beating. I think it was a beating of a slave, but he became involved when his friend Elijah Lovejoy was. He was basically an abolitionist who was an author, and he had his own newspaper. And in his newspaper, he wrote that basically Black people should be free, that Black people should have equal rights. And because of this, an angry white mob killed him. They killed Mr. Lovejoy, which kind of set John Brown on this path of vengeance. So in 1856, he killed 6 total men. Most of them were slave masters. He's most famously known for raiding Harper's Ferry. He had a small army, about 21 men. I believe that 3 or 4 of those men were actually his own children. And he attempted to capture a federal arsenal. Now, if you remember, this is the same thing that Nat Turner did. Nat Turner went to Jerusalem to try to get weapons. There, he was confronted with by the National Guard, and the United States Army, and defeated. So on October 16, 1859, John Brown attempted to raid Harper's Ferry, which was unsuccessful. It was an unsuccessful raid. And the only person that ended up losing their life was a free Black man. So he had 21 men and slaves with crude weapons like sticks and knives, but he was unsuccessful in his raid. He was seriously wounded, but he was found guilty of murder, inciting a slave insurrection, and treason against the state of Virginia. So a lot of times in history, we think that it was only Black people fighting for Black rights. Well, as you can see, Mr. Brown is clearly not a Black man, but he hated slavery so much that he was willing to kill to get rid of it. So a question that I have for you guys is, did I lose Tyquil? Oh, he's still here. Okay. Even in a state of slavery, and slavery being practiced, there's still human slavery in the world. And this is just an opinion question. Just like Nat Turner, is it ever right to kill people because you disagree with what they believe in? Or let me put it another way. Is it wrong to kill if people are treating other people in slavery, beating them, taking away their rights, taking away their families? Is there ever a scenario that you feel like it's to the point where you need to kill someone? Okay, so Destiny does agree. Sometimes actions, I'm not condoning what Mr. Brown did, and not saying what he did was right or wrong. It's more of an opinion-based thing. But some people saw him as a national hero. Some people saw him as a traitor to the country. So let's see what happened to John Brown. He was hung December 2nd, I believe 1859. And upon his sentencing, he said, "If it is deemed necessary that I should forfeit my life for the furtherance of end of justice and mingle my blood further with the blood of my children and with the blood of millions in the slave countries, whose rights are disregarded by the wicked, cruel, and unjust enactments, I submit, so let it be done." So this was someone who was willing to lay his life down to fight slavery in America. Not only lay his life down, but to fight back. So John Brown was hung December 2nd, 1859. Before he died, Brown issued these final, seemingly prophetic words in a note he handed to his jailer. So from Charleston, Virginia, 2nd December 1859, I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away, but with blood. As I now think, vainly flattered myself that without very much bloodshed, it will be done. Within 1 year, the first Southern state was seceded from the Union, and his words were prophetic because 620,000 Americans died in the Civil War. So what John Brown was saying, that slavery could not be overcome by diplomacy, it could not be overdone by legislation, that the only way to overcome slavery was blood. Okay, so now we're going to watch a few-minute video on John Brown, and then you guys can answer or respond about what you think about the video. Okay, let me share the screen with you guys.
Raymore and Flanagan's biggest Black Friday sale ever is still on. You can still save 15 to 20% off everything. And save even more with our Black Friday cyber deals. The Black Friday sale ends soon at Raymore and Flanagan.
We are under siege. According to Money.com, that's true. Over 10 billion email addresses have already been compromised in public data breaches. Did you know you can check to see if your data has been compromised on...
Hi, Selena.
The baddest white man who ever walked this planet. The great Dick Gregory called John Brown the greatest American who ever lived. Because if it wasn't for him, the Civil War would have never kicked off. W.E.B. Du Bois wrote an entire book on John Brown. Dick Gregory has wrote about him several times. Dr. Claude Anderson has wrote about John Brown. John Brown was born on May 9th, 1800. John always had a hatred for slavery. Starting at an early age when he saw a little slave boy get beaten by a shovel by a white man. John felt that it was God's plan for him to free the slaves. John's family always told him that slavery was evil. One day, angry pro-slavery white mobs had killed an abolitionist named Elijah Lovejoy. They shot him outside of his newspaper office and they burned his entire building. John attended his memorial services and said, "From this day forward, I am concentrating my life to the destruction of slavery." In 1850, Congress passed the Fugitive Slave Act, mandating that all authorities in free slave states aid in the return of escaped slaves or imposing penalties on those who aided the escapes. John Brown's answer to that was create his own group. He created a group called the League of Gileadites. John raised and trained his kids to be as much of a G as he was. John was a very stern father and believed in tough love. One of his sons got shot and he begged his dad to put a bullet into his head. John's son begged him to just take him out of his misery. While he lay there in agony, John yelled at him and said, "Shut up. If die you must, then die like a man." John Brown's first taste of blood was in the Potawatomi Massacre. John came in with his people, slicing, stabbing, and shooting people to death. What he's most popular for was his raid on Harper's Ferry. They came through killing everything in sight. John and his crew came in taking hostages, stabbing people, taking guns. John was giving guns to slaves and destroying everything in his path. John only had an army of 21 people, with 5 of them being his own kids. John was expecting over 4,000 people, but it didn't turn out that way. Harper's Ferry was where the weapons were made, so it was full of military rifles, bullets, and 4 divisions of troops guarding it. John also reached out to Frederick Douglass, he reached out to Harriet Tubman, and he reached out to other black leaders. But they declined, they wouldn't give their assistance. John felt if they joined his crusade, he can use their connections. They could call the slaves to arms. He felt that the slaves would not rally to an unknown white man. But if they knew about Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman, John used a term called the bees will hive. John and his crew took over Harper's Ferry pretty easily, but he waited way too long for the slaves to respond. John kept telling his crew to be patient. The bees will hive. After seizing and holding Harper's Ferry for 2 days, the slaves did not rally to his side. John made the fatal mistake of waiting way too long for the slaves to rise up. During the attack, John stopped the train and he decided to let the train go. But the train staff informed Washington of what's going on. Washington sent Robert E. Lee and the rest of the Marines to capture John. John was arrested and received the death penalty. On December 2nd, 1859, the day of his execution, John wrote in his diary, I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land would never be purged away but with blood. I had, and I now think vanity flattered, myself that without very much bloodshed, it might be done. After John Brown's death, Frederick Douglass wrote, Brown's struggle to the cause of freedom was far superior to mine. Mine was a small light, his was a burning sun. Mine was bound by the time he was stretched away to the silent shores of eternity. As a black man, I am willing to speak for the Negro slave. But John Brown was willing to die for the slave. John Brown was hanged in front of thousands of people in Charlestown, Virginia. Among the people at his execution was General Stonewall Jackson, poet Walt Whitman. There's over 40 books on John Brown. 40. 40. I haven't even read half of them, but I would highly recommend 2 of them. One would be W.E.B. Du Bois' book. The other book will be written by David S. Reynolds, The Abolitionists Who Killed Slavery and Sparked the Civil War. Thank you so much for watching.
Okay, so that was the story of John Brown. He was an abolitionist who was willing to fight back for Black rights. So my question is, it's a generalized question. Were John Brown's actions right or wrong? And this is just an opinion. Okay, Destiny says right. Does anyone else have an opinion on whether he was right or wrong for wanting Blacks to be freed from slavery and willing to fight and kill for that? What did John Brown say that slavery would only end in what? Blood. Destiny was paying attention. Way to go, Destiny. Thank you. And he was correct. It took over 620,000 Americans to die in the Civil War before slavery was abolished. So this is going to be our last thing we do today. I need someone to define what is an abolitionist. Hi, Quill. What's an abolitionist? Good. Thank you, Salima. Someone who stops something or is against something, and in this case, was slavery. Can you name one of the abolitionists that you learned today? What was the name of the gentleman in the video? John Brown. Thank you. And we've already answered this question. Some people think he was right. Some people would think he was wrong for his actions. In my opinion, the treatment of the American Negro and slavery was an atrocity. Now, would I have killed people per se for owning slaves? I don't know, but as a soldier, I definitely would have fought for the freedom of slaves. Okay, so that is the end of our lesson for today. Your checkpoint number 2 will go up. Let me see, do I have it? I will put up your checkpoint number 2 on Summit. Okay, and it will have to do with abolitionists. So do I have any questions about what our expectations are for next week? Okay, we'll continue with the abolitionist movement and start looking at the 1920 and the 1930s. Any questions? Okay, all this information will be on Summit for you. If you need to get a hold of me, please come to my office hours between 1 and 3. Okay? All right, thank you, Selena, for coming. Ayana, Heaven, Destiny, Tyquill. Appreciate all of you guys being here. Have a good afternoon, and I will see you next week.